Well, you thought you got rid of me. You thought finally Pater went away. No, that's right. Welcome to the Red Mountain Community Church podcast, where you can hear conversations with the people of Red Mountain Community Church as we pursue Jesus together. Each episode highlights what God is doing in someone's life or a specific theme in light of what God has revealed in the Bible. I am still, unfortunately, Pater Franson, one of the elders and your fellow seat warmer here at Red Mountain Community Church. My co-host today is Kyle Fox, our senior pastor. Welcome, Kyle. Been a while since you've been in this chair across from me.
It's been a while for Kyle. But just overwhelmed with gladness about being here.
I can just hear it in your voice. I can see it in your face. This is going to be a great show. So let's start with the irresistible question, which this time is, what is your go-to... I didn't tell you in advance what this was. What's your go-to karaoke song? You ever done karaoke? You ever do karaoke?
No.
Karaoke?
I'm sure I have done karaoke. My wife likes karaoke. She's always ready to sing.
Okay.
So we do a lot of singing together. Honestly, the first song that comes to my mind... Well, the problem is with karaoke is it's usually 80s ballads, and I cannot stand that genre of music. So just to that.
Yeah.
But I would... There's two that come to mind. First, any 90s country.
Oh.
I would karaoke.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know you were a country guy.
I used to be. I don't listen to much music anymore. But 90s country, like, will get stuck in my head.
Wow.
Like I was singing this week, Goodbye Earl by Dixie Chicks. That was just in my head.
How does that go?
It goes. You can YouTube it. And the other song that comes to my mind is I Want to Dance with Somebody by...
Oh, yeah. And I Want to Also Feel the Heat with Somebody.
Yeah. Is it Whitney Houston?
That sounds right. With Somebody Who Loves Me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody Who Loves Me.
Yeah. Oh,
that song came to my head, and then 90s country.
I want to see that. I have never done karaoke. I think that, like, there was one time it was an option, and I asked the person who was running it, I don't know, DJ or whatever, like, do you have any Barry Manilow? And he did not have any Barry Manilow. And, like, that is, like, about the same time that I was developing my love for Steve Green music. Around the same time, I was really into Barry Manilow. Because my dad is a Barry Manilow fan. And I was into it at the time where, like, it was not cool to be a Barry Manilow fan. It was like he was the butt of jokes and stuff like that. And I legit loved his songs. I mean, like, I think it's because of my personality, probably. He writes these really sad songs. Of course, that's what he's known for. But there was one song that it was not, well, it has a dark ending to it, but it's very upbeat, called Copacabana. Have you heard of this song?
Sure. Probably have.
And when I was in, this is the song I would choose to do karaoke with, because when I was in high school, they had this Broadway concert every year in our choir where you could audition to sing a solo in between choral numbers that was associated with a Broadway show. And just that year, they made a musical that went on Broadway. It was there for like a day, I think. That was based on Barry Manilow music, and Copacabana was one of the songs in there. And so I was like, yes, I can now justify singing Copacabana. Yeah. And so the song is a story. I mean, like, her name is Lola. She was a showgirl, and it's all about this like just doomed relationship.
I've heard that
song. Yeah, at the Copacabana. So the story is about this woman Lola, who was a dancer, and then like one of the guys that worked at the club, he was like in love with her, but then like there was a third party that came along, and he's more like a gangster type guy, and they end up getting killed or something like that, or like her love gets killed. But I wore a split costume with a woman on one side and like a half of a dress on one side, and then a tux on the other side. And so as I sang the song and sang about the characters, I would flip back and forth between the two.
Gosh, Peter.
And we still have some remnants.
So you're saying this actually happened?
This actually happened in
You
high
actually
school.
did that?
Yes, I sang this, and two of my friends were the backup singers with jazz hands and all.
Man.
And it was like, I don't mind, saying that it brought the house down. So that if I could sing karaoke and they had Barry Manilow, I would say put on Copacabana now. This is happening, and it's gonna blow everybody away. Anyway, as a reminder, you can message us on Instagram or Facebook with suggestions for fun things we could do or talk about before the interview. So if that was just kind of dark and disturbing for you to hear about, then you can suggest something else that we talk about, and we could do that instead. But for now, we are going to move things along. Earlier today, Kyle and I spent some time talking with Dave Slick. Great conversation about his leadership of the Heritage Ministry, a bit about the book he has written that is very much inspired by his time in that ministry. We had such a great time talking to it, and I think you'll enjoy it as well. Well, Dave, thanks for being willing to get behind the mic and have a chat with us here in this weird setting of, Have you done any kind of podcast type thing before?
First time for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did this. It's interesting. I was thinking about the fact that of all the Sunday school teachers, I probably know the least about you personally. I mean, I drop in there and get a sample once a year to do my caroling announcement in your class, and always appreciate what you're doing in there. But I don't know anything about your journey to step into that role, and so I'm looking forward to getting into that. But first, can you give me a snapshot of just your current stage of life, any people or routines relevant to that?
Well, sure. I'm retired. I'm 74 years old, and I spent almost 50 years working in the electric utility industry.
Okay.
Among my career stops were 11 years at APS and 31 years at SRP.
Wow.
The local electric providers. You may have heard of them.
Yeah. So I should call you up and I'm like, what is going on with SRP?
Yeah, I have had that reaction from a number of people. And when I retired from SRP, I wasn't ready to jump completely into the pool of retirement. So I dipped my toe in by going to work for a consulting firm here in Mesa that dealt with electric utility issues. And that was fun. It was largely on my schedule, part-time, only needed a laptop. It was easy to do. And 5 years into my 3-year plan for that, I finally pulled the plug.
Okay. And
retired full-time. My wife, Denise, is 72. I got her permission to say that.
Okay.
She was a speech-language pathologist in Mesa Public Schools for nearly 2 decades. And she's the smart one. She retired about 10 years prior to me. My retirement plan was I would retire first and she would work to support my golf habit. And her retirement plan was she would retire first and I would support her golf habit. And you can see who won. So we both enjoy that sport, although neither one of us is particularly skilled at it. We were both previously married and divorced. We have 3 adult children between us and 4 grandchildren. They're all super busy. Most of them are local. They're all super busy with their careers and their lives. We don't see them very often, but we enjoy the experience when we do. 2 of them are students at the U of A right now. So that's our family situation. One major routine in our lives at this point stems from a decision we made 20 years ago. We were interested in getting a second home in the mountains someday, and at that time moved to purchase a home in Pinetop. At the time, we didn't know if that was going to be a retirement home, a second home, an investment property. We didn't know what God would have in mind or how that would work out over time. We've been richly blessed and able to sustain that property. So, at this point, now that we're both fully retired, we've become seasonal residents in Mesa, or you might think short distance snowbirds, as it were.
Okay.
And we'll head up to the mountains in the middle of April or May and return in the fall.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, when and how roughly, I know this can kind of be a vague question, and everybody's kind of journey, it can kind of come in stages or whatever, but like, how would you describe how you first came to faith in Jesus?
Well, I was raised in Catholicism. My mom was Catholic. My dad was Episcopalian. And we went to church regularly on both Christmas and Easter. My mom felt like she had been formally or informally excommunicated from her church when she married my dad, because that was a big deal for a Catholic to marry a non-Catholic in the 1940s.
Okay.
And told me that story in tears later in her life. For me, I became acquainted with and got involved with Young Life in high school. So it was there that I began talking with my peers about the differences in different belief systems. And the hang-up for me with Catholicism was confession. I don't know if that was because every time I went, I got a whole bunch of Our Fathers and Hail Marys in response to what I said, or comically speaking, or more seriously, the notion of needing to have an intermediary between me and God for prayer. That didn't make sense to me. So I believed that Jesus was the Son of God very early on, and moved to that more personal relationship later on, as a teen and thereafter. I think that I was raised, I was a young child, and I was raised in the 1950s. And I think that raising young children in the 1990s or in more recent decades is a considerably different proposition in the United States, if only from the standpoint of information technology. Really, a really different world in that regard and in the culture. So in my age of innocence, my parents equipped me by providing principles for living that proved to be biblically based. I may not have known it at the time, but I've sure discovered that as I got older. And they reflected God's goodness with their unconditional love for me. They really did, and I love them dearly.
So you've been teaching and leading the Heritage Sunday School class for as long as I can remember. How long has it been? Do you know?
17 years.
Okay, yeah. So for those who don't know, who is that class intended for? Maybe people have never heard of that class. Because it's a bit different in nature compared to, like, we'll do like sometimes a topical class, or most often like a Bible track class that's like, this is about Hebrews, this is about Isaiah or whatever, but Heritage class. Okay, so what's that? What are you guys doing?
Okay. Well, whenever I'm asked about my involvement, or often when I'm asked about my involvement on church campus, I say that I'm involved with children's ministry. And then I say that the average age of the kids is 75. I get these kinds of responses to that, and then I say, hey, we're all God's children, right? So the Heritage class is Red Mountain's senior adult ministry. It's advertised as being either age 50 plus or age 55 plus in various places, but anyone who's interested is welcome to attend.
Okay. And so what's kind of like the content week to week of what you guys are doing, or what's being taught, or how is the time spent?
Sometimes we will study a book of the Bible.
Okay.
Sometimes we'll study a topic. Sometimes we'll study a theme like parables in the Bible.
Okay.
So it varies from season to season and time to time. I consult with Kyle and others at the beginning of each season and kind of say, this is what we're thinking about doing. Does that make sense? Is that okay? And they've generally agreed with that, and so that's how we proceed.
Okay. Every time that I come in there on my annual visit, I also notice that there's like this this kind of community dynamic that I don't see near to the same degree in other classes. I would guess maybe that's because some people might sign on because they want to do the book of Hebrews or the book of Revelation, but maybe they're like, oh, I'll do something else when, Isaiah comes around and stuff. But like this is like the same class, same group that's meeting. And there's also like a lot of back and forth, a lot of like conversation and stuff going on. How have you found that? Well, I want to hear about just your experience of of leading this class, the dynamic of it. But first, start with like, how did you end up with the opportunity to teach and lead the Heritage class? How did you make the decision when the opportunity presented itself to then commit yourself to it? Because 17 years, I don't know if you knew you were going to be in for 17 years at the time, but I mean, it's certainly a commitment. So how did that crossroads present itself to you? And then how did you go about making the decision to commit to it?
It's an interesting story, I think. Denise and I obtained the keys to our house in Northeast Mesa on Christmas Eve in 2002, and we began attending Red Mountain Community Church in January 2003, around the same time that we moved into the house. And we got here at really the suggestion and invitation of Steve and Jan Dolter, our friends. Yeah. And so we had been on campus for a few years doing normal church congregant stuff, like attending service and going to classes and seminars and conferences and leading a small group for a time, for a few years. And it was the spring of 2007 when Kyle's dad, we were, of course, over in the gym building for church service at that time, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And Bob did a sermon in the form of a sports analogy.
Okay.
And sports analogies sermons are something of an Achilles heel for me, because I stay awake almost all the time during a sports analogy sermon. So it got my attention. And on that occasion, Bob talked about the notion that people could come to church and sit in the stands and be spectators, or we could come to church and get on the field, as it were, and actually participate and contribute. He offered this revolutionary idea that the responsibility of the church was not just the province of the pastors, the leadership team, the staff, and others who were formally involved with the church, but that everybody had a role. And he probably backed up that claim by pointing to Scripture that talks about the ear, the eye, the hand, the different parts being indispensable parts of the body to do different functions. Mm-hmm. So that particular sermon really spoke to my heart. Even though at that time I was working 50 to 60 hours a week in my 40-hour-a-week job, I was very happy with that. I was very engaged with it, but I realized I could be doing more. So my next step was to take the spiritual gifts inventory, which happened to be offered shortly thereafter, and that confirmed what I had known from taking a similar inventory at another church. And among the things that it pointed to was, well, maybe I could offer some value in teaching. So I went to Carlisle Naylor at that time and said I might be interested in volunteering, and maybe teaching would be a place where I could help out. And he asked me then to participate in a survey for candidates of such roles to see if I was qualified to do it. Apparently that passed the muster with the leadership team. So I suggested to him I might be willing to teach newcomers, because that's what I would be suited for. I'd never been to seminary. And I thought, well, if someone was searching or new to the faith, I might have a level of knowledge. I could at least get him between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I might even be able to point him to a gospel or two. But I didn't know how much further I could go, right? And Carlisle eventually came back and said, well, yeah, we might have an opportunity for you, but it's not with newcomers, it's with the Heritage class. And I said, "What's that?" And he told me it was the senior adult ministry. And I said, "That doesn't make any sense because I'm not in that age group."
How old were you at the time?
I was a youthful 56, emphasis on youthful. When I jumped, you could still see air under my shoes. My 150-yard club at that time was still an 8-iron. I was still a youthful 56. And I looked at that group and I thought, nah, it doesn't make any sense. He said it did make sense. And I was aggravated about that. That was not something I wanted to hear. And it was at that point that Kyle's dad's other buddy, the Holy Spirit, made a house call. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. And I went through a trial period thereafter and some other steps, but the rest is history, so to speak.
What do you remember? I'm curious, because people will kind of describe those kinds of moments in different ways. What do you remember about the Holy Spirit? Like, what did that look like? How did that manifest? I'm assuming it wasn't like an audible voice. I mean, there are rare cases where people will have that experience. But like, what do you unpack that a little bit for me?
Well, for me, it was, okay, Dave, you volunteered to help out. They offered you an opportunity to volunteer. How can you not accept that opportunity? It was fairly logical.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I came back, yeah, well, I'll try that.
Yeah.
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 I didn't know I was going to be subsequently going through a trial period. That was kind of interesting.
Okay.
But, yeah.
And how long did that trial period go?
A month.
A month, okay.
Yeah.
And then
they asked me to lead a study of the book of Proverbs for each of 4 different weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you were the guy.
Well, it took weeks or months thereafter before they said, yeah, we'd like you to continue to lead this.
Okay.
So,
wow, cool.
from my point of view, that's what transpired.
Yeah. So then it's been 17 years now. And so what has that journey of leading that class been like for you personally? I can imagine that there are like some things that are just wonderful about it, some things that are really challenging about it. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, for me, it's been nothing but a blessing. And I think the reason is going to get to the question you asked earlier. I decided early on to take a facilitated discussion approach in leading the class. Some might call it the Socratic method. It's not complete public outcry, but it's a facilitated discussion. And the reason I did that is because at that time, we could get a stimulating sermon from Bob every week, and now we get a stimulating sermon from Kyle every week. They didn't need 2 sermons in a row, I didn't think. So what could I offer would be facilitating discussion from people who brought a lot of life experience to the table. When I stand in front of them on Sunday mornings, I'm literally looking at thousands of years of life experience. And so why not tap into that as a benefit? Let other people talk about their experiences with the Lord and how it's affected their lives in the context of whatever we're studying, whether it's a book of the Bible or a topic or a theme from the Bible. And that's worked out really well. Ultimately, what I discovered is that while I thought I had won an audition as the teacher, I actually have won the audition as the student. So I go in and I'm the greatest benefactor of what's going on in that room just by listening to what people are saying and seeing how that affects my life. It's been a wonderful blessing.
Could you talk about just your experience in the early years of that class, particularly surrounding worship style and worship music, and how those things progress? Because I think that's an important part of the story.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, in the early years when I came in, so after Preston and Carlisle said, yeah, we'd like you to do this, they then had another conversation with me along the lines of, oh, by the way, there's some problems in there.
Now that you've said yes.
Yes, now that you've said yes, welcome to the party. And we want you to go in there and solve those problems. And, I don't know how specific they were at the time, but to Kyle's point, it proved to be grumbling about church music. So in my genius approach to that, I think it was in 2009, I decided to have a special session on the subject of church music. And what I asked people in the room to do was consider yourselves a management consulting firm, and you're here to advise the church on what they should be doing with church music. Because to me, the change that was happening at that time was very obvious as to why a church would do that. Why wouldn't you try to appeal to younger generations of people through music? So we held that special session and went through all the reasons that people disliked and had problems with church music, and spoke to many of those things. Talked about who church music and what worship is supposed to be for. It's supposed to be for God, you know, and got to really some fundamental issues with that subject. And I thought, this is brilliant. They'll all come around. There will be no more grumbling. What a tremendous success. It was a total failure. And the reason is because, you know, they couldn't, some people didn't have adjustable hearing aids. And others...
Are you talking about like the spiritual hearing aid or the mental hearing aid?
The physical hearing aid.
So like seriously?
Both.
Music is too loud.
The music is too loud.
I thought you meant like they couldn't hear you, what you were talking about in the class.
They can always hear me. That's not ever been an issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that is a pragmatic.
It is a pragmatic thing.
issue.
We had people at that time who walked out into the lobby until the worship portion was over, and then would walk back in for the sermon. So speaking to that was a major issue at that time. I think they grudgingly agreed with the direction of the church and why it was going forward, but it didn't change what type of music they liked, and it didn't really affect their hearing aids much. So that's where that ended up.
Which I think is really good, because I think it just demonstrates your humility, Dave, in terms of just being a leader and being willing to take on these challenging things, but not try to control the outcome, and letting the Holy Spirit kind of use you how he's going to use you, but in the end, he's the one working in people's hearts. And you've been so patient with that as a leader in this regard. And I think that has been true since 2009 and continues to be true in 2025. You've maintained, if not grown somehow, in that level of humility. And I think that's been key to the leadership that you've exhibited and the leadership that is given to this group, and the kind of leadership we want at this church.
Well, thank you. I think anything good that's come out of that room has been God breathed. Things have happened in that room that I couldn't have possibly predicted, and that's the Holy Spirit at work. It's been amazing.
And I think you know, the way you, Dave, you talk about it, it was more successful than you're letting on. I do think there were some intense division points and intense arguments happening within the church family at that point, and you being a voice to kind of wade into those conversations and actually deal with it, I do think helped change the culture of Red Mountain to a more unifying place and a more unified culture. So yes, there were still grumblings, and there probably, as long as there's church music, there will be grumblings. It seems like that surround volume and song choice and everything else, and there's new phases of those conversations, but we always want to strive for unity in that, because in the end it's about the glorification of God and lifting high his name, which I think was instrumental in that time period. There were so many churches that were splitting, and that didn't happen at Red Mountain. We maintained the course in part because of your willingness to obey the Spirit in that.
Well, we had read somewhere that an author had written and wondered if churches in America were producing more Christians or more music critics because of the divisiveness of people's views about worship music. And I've seen that in other churches. It continues, to this day. I don't know that will change, but thanks for asking about it. It was a major thing at that time. That's for sure.
Now, you kind of alluded to just kind of like how you've seen God work in that class, and so I want to touch on that as well. What kinds of things would you say you've seen God doing, or that you suspect has been God working in that class and community over the years?
Sure. I've seen God establish and nurture relationships that I didn't think were possible among certain people. For folks in that age group, encouragement is a big deal because so many folks are facing health challenges and medical issues and procedures and doctor visits all the time. So, we could almost structure the class around, okay, let's have the report on this week's surgeries, next week's visits with specialists, and so forth. And that happens informally whenever people meet. We're all talking about our various infirmities. So having people speak encouragement into the lives of other folks in those moments is very good. And finally, hearing the testimonies of God's work in people's lives is very uplifting. Any number of people have told me how much they've appreciated the way in which we've done that, or created a forum for that to happen.
Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit. You recently wrote a book called God, Geezers, and Golf. I'm going to take a crack at reading what I was sent as the description that you have for it. What if the films Grumpy Old Men and Back to the Future collided in a Sunday school class? Senior citizens are one of the more difficult groups of God's children to deal with on church campuses because they already know everything there is to know about everything, including how to run a church. In 2007, that was certainly true at Mountaintop Community Church in Mesa, Arizona, a suburb of Phoenix. So when 56-year-old energy industry analyst Sam Slouch was invited to lead a class for those in the hospice preschool community, he wasn't thrilled. What could possibly be the joy, hope, or fun in doing that? Well, occasionally God seems to know what he's doing. Thus, Sam took on the sometimes challenging and sometimes charming nature of the high-mileage crowd. But how did he get on this luxury passenger train? Sam didn't remember boarding. Where had it come from? Where was it going? And who were these other travelers? Sam had no idea. He was clearly lost. Written for those of us who are on the back nine of life, God, Geezers, and Golf is occasionally irreverent, fittingly humorous, and appropriately poignant. This short read offers a heartwarming take on the ups and downs of senior citizen church life through the lens of one man's journey. How did you do, any research for this? This must have been so hard to learn about what this,
Yeah. How could I have possibly come up with an idea for this story?
So I guess the more relevant question would be like, what actually prompted you to write God, Geezers, and Golf?
Well, there are several things that I'd like to talk about in the space of that question. One of the original motives was that I wanted to create something clean, uplifting, and humorous. At the time I started this project, it was August of 2020. We were in Pine Top and we were watching what was going on in the United States. There was a lot of social unrest, a lot of fear about COVID. I didn't see a lot of things that I thought were clean, uplifting, and humorous on the landscape of our lives.
Yeah.
So I wanted to speak into that. Secondly, I wanted to bless others who had blessed me, because it's just been such an enriching experience to be here, to have the opportunity to interact with these people, and many of them did things for me that I can't possibly repay. A third reason for anyone in my age group who's writing a book for the first time must have some legacy purpose in mind, is my belief. And I certainly do. And usually that means family and friends, and certainly there are folks that I hope will read it and get some enjoyment out of it. Another thought is that I wanted to sort of record how we were approaching senior adult ministry. And while that wasn't my foremost goal, I know that others see the work as being about a book about how to do senior adult ministry, or one way to do it. And then finally, I wanted to participate in the Great Commission. I'm not one to go down to the street corner and hold up my John 3:16 sign. So I thought this might be a way to speak to an audience that's not often the target of our energy and resources on church campuses. It's older folks. And I would argue and contend that ministry to the average 7, 8, and 9-year-old and ministry to the average 70, 80, or 90-year-old are different propositions, different challenges.
Yeah.
And so I took the approach that I did in this effort aimed at that older group.
Okay, so when I first read the copy for the description, and especially when I got to certainly true at Mountaintop Community Church in Mesa, Arizona, a suburb of Phoenix, I was like, okay, I think I'm getting a little sense of where he's drawing from. So like with some very obvious parallels to your own experience, in the writing process, were you ever nervous about including certain things because of how they might be interpreted by those who are familiar with both you and Red Mountain, who might wonder, hey, wait a minute, is this me, or or whatever? I mean, did you have any of those thoughts, and if so, like how did you navigate that in the choices you made when writing?
Oh my, it's a great question. I thank you for asking it. It's really a great question. There is a sometimes indistinguishable line between fiction and nonfiction in the work. And I think there's a difference between being nervous or being worried versus addressing issues of liability. As I've worked with people in the publishing industry, I found that they are uniformly and rightly concerned about issues of liability. So the journey here is not a short one in terms of both the length of time it took me to get from writing the first chapter all those years ago to publishing something recently. And the character name Odyssey in particular is part of where your question led me to think. At the beginning, in the earliest drafts of the work, I used all real names of people. And then when I encountered publishing industry professionals, they said, well, you can only do that if you get the written permission from every one of them. And at the time, which was now years ago, I thought, well, no, I'm going to be publishing this next month. I can't wait for all that. So I changed to all fictitious names and mostly fictitious locations and places, and proceeded accordingly through various ups and downs in my experience with developing this until I got to my editor, the person I finally ended up working with. Jennifer Crosswhite is a Christian author and is the person who edited the work and did a great job. And she read it and said, well, there are a lot of people in your book who would be blessed to see their real names in this. So I was back to the drawing board with, okay. So then I reached out to a whole bunch of people and asked if they would be willing to let me use their real names in the work. And they said, yes, they were. The vast majority of them did that. I asked Jennifer, well, is it okay to have a blend of fictitious and real names? She said, yes. So there's some of that in there. Another factor was that in the early editions of it, the early drafts, I had well north of 100 named characters in the book, and I needed to reduce that. So that reduced the challenge in some respects. And then finally, numerous people who are named in the book have read draft versions along the way. Numerous groups of people had a chance to look at that. And especially among the one or two about whom I might be concerned in this regard, they supported moving forward the work, so I did.
Wow, that's great. I think that speaks to your grace in the experiences that they've had with you and the trust that you've developed with them. So that's really interesting and really cool to hear. So I could be totally wrong, but like I'm wondering, is this the first time you've written a book? What has this experience been like in terms of just engaging with that craft for you? and the whole process, because you touched on like the interacting with the editor and publishing and stuff. Like, how would you describe like some major bullet points of the experience for you?
Well, I as a freshman in college in the engineering program, in my first semester, I got A's in English and humanities and C's in calculus and chemistry, and wondered a little bit about what I was doing.
Wait a minute, didn't you end up in like electricity and like that kind of stuff?
Yeah, my degree's in electrical engineering.
That does not compute.
Yeah. Well, the second semester I got an A in calculus. That sort of righted the ship.
Okay.
But I've had an interest in writing for a long time. However, when you spend 50 years in the electric utility industry, and most days writing or reading reports and dealing with that for a lot of hours each day, there's not a lot of time left over for creative writing. So I didn't pursue it, even though I've had the interest in doing so for a while. In the industry in which I worked, I was the beneficiary of working with lots of really smart people on deeply complex issues that face the electric utility industry. And in one of the groups that I worked in, where these folks were experts about really complex things, they had a saying that stuck with me for a long time: you don't know what you don't know. And although that's a truism, I found that to be profoundly true of a lot of things. When I entered into this publishing industry, I was profoundly naive, and I made quite a few rookie mistakes, including some big ones. Last year in January, February, I was very discouraged and ready to throw in the towel. It was a really dark time for me. Regarding traditional versus independent publishing, I had understood a local, well-known, well-respected Christian literary agent to tell audiences that unless you have a social media platform with 1 million or more followers, or some other substantial platform, that first-time authors are not going to be considered by traditional publishing companies.
Yeah.
So that set my path. I believe that, and that set my path for moving towards independently or self-publishing the work. So specifically regarding your question, the writing process was a fair amount of work. It was intellectually stimulating, and the effort brought me numerous moments of happiness and joy. I also enjoyed working with the cover designer when I got to that step.
Okay.
And I very much enjoyed the audiobook production process, which was an all new territory for me as well. But everything else that went with it was an arguably larger amount of work, intellectually frustrating, and the effort brought me fewer moments of happiness or joy. Yeah, I learned a lot. I'm not sure I wanted to learn about how to develop a website or how to establish a business or a bank account for business, and all the things that have gone along with in the peripheral areas of undertaking this project. But it's been quite the experience, that's for sure.
So when all is said and done, what are you kind of hoping that the Lord will do with the book?
My fondest hope for the work is that as a result of reading it, one senior adult, just one, somewhere, will choose to revisit his or her thinking about Christianity, perhaps his or her former rejection of the Bible, and choose Jesus while they still have an opportunity to do so.
I'll just add to it, as someone who's read the book
Okay.
and knows Dave and knows the Heritage class, and I've had personal experiences in there of teaching, but also just personal relationships with the attenders. While I'm outside of the targeted age group, one thing that I've appreciated about the class is that it's not just a class. And Peter, you hinted on this earlier. It is a community. In much the same sense that we have youth groups.
Yeah.
for junior high and high school, because at such a critical time of life where community is so important. And you've joked about this being children's ministry or whatever, and in the book description you call it hospice preschool community. There is this sense where this particular life stage, there's a particular need for community that is really important. But that community is so hard to foster because in the past, communities in this age group have been rooted in criticism. But what has happened in this Red Mountain group is that it's a community based upon Jesus Christ, but also care. So it's gone from criticism to care. And I hope that as people read this book and they see all these names that you've named and stories that you're telling, communicate this deep sense of community that people need, especially in the back nine of life. That people, our culture tends to kind of just brush away that back nine and view it as, oh, that's retired people and they go and play golf or whatever. But there's so much impact that can happen and so much work to be done by that age group that I hope this book fosters that kind of community in other churches, because Heritage has been such a blessing to Red Mountain in so many different ways, and how they care not just for people in their group, but it's care for people in the church. I can't, every time I go visit somebody in the hospital, every time I go visit someone who's kind of sick in their home, it doesn't matter what age group, there is someone from the Heritage class that has visited them or brought something to them. Every time. And it's that's not normal for an age group 55 plus to be serving the church in that way. But that's what's happening. So I'm just blessed by that. I think as a church leader, I see that happening. I'm just like, man, thank the Lord for that, because we just need that.
Yeah.
We need that being done at a church. And so I hope this book somehow communicates that level of community and that type of community, because that's been key to Red Mountain's health and continues to be. That we have a healthy, caring community that's actually fueled by this class and this age group, when normally churches are being hindered because of criticism or because of cynicism, both towards that kind of group and coming out of that group, if that makes sense. So there's this healthy dynamic happening, and I just long for other churches to experience that, because it's been such a personal blessing for me. I know it was a personal blessing to my dad when he was lead pastor. It's a personal blessing to me now, but it's a personal blessing to so many that I just hope the Lord does a great work with this book and a good movement of the Spirit towards greater church health.
Where can people buy a copy? Is it available? Like, we're recording this on the 19th of March. That's not when the episode's going to go up. But like, I don't know if it's available as of the 19th of March, or like where can people buy a copy if they're interested in God, Geezers, and Golf?
Well, we produced the novel in 3 different formats: paperback, ebook, and audiobook, and they're all available on Amazon.
Okay, great.
They're all available right now. And additionally, I'm willing to sell paperbacks in person if they ever deliver them to me.
Nice. And I want to kind of like underscore what Kyle said about just what a blessing the Heritage class has been. Just from my limited interfacing with them, with the caroling ministry, it is absolutely like vital to me that I continue going there every year and reminding that community about the caroling ministry. Not because I'm thinking a bunch of them are going to go. A lot of them, they're just not in the stage of life where they can do this, hardcore, even if it's raining, caroling or whatever. But the baked goods and the money donations, the vast majority of that is coming from the Heritage class, because they just are ready to give. And so I just really appreciate what you have fostered there. When and where on our campus can people go to attend the Heritage class?
Well, generally the class meets during September through the middle of April. We're in classroom G10 at the present time. People begin, on Sunday mornings, of course, people begin gathering around 8:30 for a coffee so they can endure me and refreshments and socializing. And then the formal class activities start around 9 or 10.
Okay.
Go from in the first hour, 9 to 10.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, I hope that some people listening who maybe haven't checked out that class before will really consider it. It's just a real blessing to the life of our church to have that community and to have you leading it. So, Dave, thanks so much for
Well, thank you both.
the time to talk about
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Well, I feel like I say it every time, like that was a great conversation, but I mean it every time I say it. And again, this was like, oh, this was so cool to hear things I didn't know about just Dave's journey, his experience with that class, to hear about the culture of the class, stuff that like I suspected was true, but just to hear like, what was being said, I was like, yep, that totally, I was seeing little snippets of that. So, just great to have that opened up. So what is maybe something from our time talking to Dave that stood out to you?
Yeah, two things. I think I just appreciate his humility and how he approaches the leadership of that group and the things that have happened in that group under his watch. And again, it's all always to God's glory, and God's doing and has done incredible things through that ministry. It's tough to call a class because class makes it feel like it's this thing. It really is a community.
Yeah.
It's a fellowship of believers.
Yeah.
And I thought that came through loud and clear. And I'm just so grateful for that. The other thing that sticks out to me always about Dave is his sense of humor. He is so funny.
Yeah.
And it's like such good humor.
It's really dry and straight. And
Yes.
Yeah.
It could be unsuspecting, but all of a sudden, boom, it comes. Like even the fact that he named himself Sam Slouch in the book is so good. Like the book carries forward that humor in so many ways. But just talking with him, you're always going to laugh because he just has such a great sense of humor.
Yeah. Very gracious and easy to be in the room with. I appreciated a couple of things. The first was just him sharing how he was first moved to serve, and just having that time where your dad was talking about engaging in the church, not as a spectator, but as a member of the team, and as you know, as elders, we've been talking through and praying through just this idea of discipleship and longing for people to more and more grow in their sense of purpose and engaging in their purpose in the church body and growing and developing so that they can serve and lead in various ways. And just to see like an example of how that happened in someone's life and like what they did, just simply just saying, you know what, I'm going to step forward and I'm going to be faithful.
Yeah.
Here's how God seems to have wired me. I'm going to offer myself and say, because he didn't even necessarily have this vision of like what he was going to do. He just realized this is how I'm wired, and told Carlisle, I'm available. What do you think? And then let the leadership kind of look at that situation and plug him in, and then look at all the fruit that has developed because of that I'm sure he never suspected, which is just so encouraging and energizing to think about all the people in Red Mountain that maybe haven't had that moment yet. They thought about like, I wonder what the Lord might want me to step into and engage in that could be growing for me and energizing and life-giving for both me and for others. Really cool. And then just as like a side piece, as a former worship pastor for 1 minute at this church, the growth in that community in them talking through worship and like, what is this really about? Instead of getting caught up in kind of like the style and stuff like that, resonates with me so strongly, because you don't have to be in your senior years to like, not like the style of music at church. I have never connected, almost never, stylistically with music that is done, you know, in the church. It's just not the kind of music I want to listen to. I want to listen to weird music, like really dark, screaming, emotive metal. Like Red is like the only band in existence as far as I'm concerned. Or film score or something like that. But like, you know, I just don't connect stylistically with what typically is done on Sunday mornings in churches. But the words and the truth and the purpose of what we're engaging in, and the fact that we're doing it together as a body. I mean, so just to know that like he's been cultivating a culture that is pivoting away from this tunnel vision, focusing on style, to like, what is this really about? I just so am grateful for him and what he's done there.
And especially doing it as a fellow seat warmer.
Yeah.
This is not someone who's an elder at the church. This is not someone who's on pastoral staff.
Yeah.
He's just a guy.
Yeah.
And yet he has this conviction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important in a church, is to have normal lay people have a conviction about this stuff, and to be able to facilitate honest, open, transformative conversation.
Yeah.
Is really powerful.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's it for this episode of the Red Mountain Community Church podcast. A big thank you to Arian Rossi for organizing and editing the show, to Jessica Garcia for her oversight, and to the pastors and church leaders, Turn Page, who help recommend our guests. You can follow Red Mountain Community Church on Instagram and Facebook, where you can also leave us comments and suggestions to help make the show better. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you don't miss out on the next episode. And if by chance you want more of me blabbing on topics relevant to Christian geeks, you can check out my personal weekly show, the Christian Geek Central podcast. In the meantime, I'm Peter Franson.
I'm Kyle Fox.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on Sunday.